Welcome to part 2 of this review for AP Macroeconomics, and I'm just going through the 2005 test, and if I were you, watching this video, I would try to answer each of the problems. When I get to a problem, pause it, see if you can answer it, and then hit play again so you can hear the basically I'm just kind of giving you my reasoning, how I would think through each of these problems. I hope it helps. This is part 2. We'll do questions 16 through 30. Part 3 then we'll have probably 31 through 45, and then part 4 will probably have the rest of them. So, let's continue. Questions 16 and 17 refer to the following: graph of a country's production possibilities curve. Cool. So if we're currently producing, if 2 coats are currently being produced, the opportunity cost of producing a 3rd coat is... By the way, that's your cue to pause the video and try solve it. Alright, so I would say, alright, I'm producing 2, so I'm at this point here. I could produce, if I'm producing 2 coats, I could be doing up to 85 belts. If I try to go up to 3 coats, the most I could do is 75 belts. That means I'm giving up 15 belts to do 1 more coat. I'm going to go with D as my correct answer. Number 17, the best combination of belts and coats for this economy to produce is... Well, let's think about that a second. All of these points on this curve are productively efficient. I don't know what's the most allocatively efficient because I don't really know what people in this country, in this economy, actually like. Do they really like coats a lot? Do they like belts a lot? What's more important to them? So really, I don't know what's the best combination, and thankfully there's a choice for that, E. Indeterminate with the information available. Number 18. The unemployment rate measures the percentage of... the key here is, of course, that it's people who don't have jobs, but it's not just everybody who doesn't have jobs, because there are some people who don't really want jobs, like my retired parents. So it's people who are in the labor force who do not have jobs. They've got to be counted as part of the labor force. If you have a part-time job but are looking for full-time, you're underemployed. You're not unemployed. People who do not have jobs and have given up looking for work, they're not part of the labor force. We don't count them. People in the adult population who do not have jobs, again, my parents are not part of the labor force and they're adults. People in the adult population who have temporary jobs, they are employed, albeit temporarily. Number 19. The classical economist argued that involuntary unemployment would be eliminated by... the big thing here is, with classical economists, I'm going to quickly draw that scenario with our aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. Oops. So there's aggregate supply. Sorry, I'm kind of out of space there, so you can't read my labels. Aggregate demand. If we're involuntary, it probably means we're in a recession. So here's my long run aggregate supply, means we're at this point here. So the big thing here is the difference probably between Keynesian and classical economists. Keynesian would say, look, we can get stuck at this point, and then we need to do something to get back, so let's increase government spending and get aggregate demand up. Classical economists said, no, markets fix themselves. I don't need to worry about that. So Keynes says increase government spending. Keynes might also suggest increasing the money supply. Classical economists say, no, markets fix themselves. Don't worry about it. They would say, well, look, we've got unemployment at this point. That's going to drive down wages, which will increase aggregate supply, which will get us back to that point there. So Maintaining the growth of the money supply at a constant rate, that's kind of a monetarist policy. Decreasing corporate income taxes to encourage investment, that was that supply side economics. So really the classical economist would say, just let the markets correct themselves. Number 20. Which of the following can be considered a leakage from the circular flow of economic activity? If you remember the... Oh, sorry, I should pause and let you try to answer that. Alright, so if the circular flow, you remember you got households, you've got businesses, and we'll actually throw government in there as well, and households give their resources to businesses in exchange resources, I don't know if I spelled that right. Anyway, resources in exchange for pay. So in the resource market, we do that. In the product market, households buy products from businesses, and all that money that households use to buy products from businesses turn around and use that to buy resources from the households to make products that the households buy from businesses, and it goes around and around. And of course, the government buys some resources from households. The government also buys products from businesses, and you could even say the government has some direct interaction with taxes and services provided to households. So anyway, that's kind of our circular flow, and that money just keeps flowing around and around and around and around, except that sometimes households pull their money aside and they save it. So the correct answer here is that savings is that leakage. Now that saving goes into a bank, and the bank might turn around and loan it out as investment, and so it might make its way back into business that way. But the leakage really is that savings. Exports maybe is a tempting one there because households don't buy from businesses in the U.S., but they are buying from businesses in the rest of the world who then turn around and buy stuff from businesses in the U.S. So really the leakage is that savings. Basically, if I take my money and bury it in the backyard, it's no longer flowing in the economy. Alright, 21. An increase in the marginal propensity to consume causes an increase in which of the following? The big idea there is, the big idea is the spending multiplier. That's the correct answer. That idea that if there's an increase in government spending, then that turns into income, and we spend a portion of that, and so it gets that multiplier. Well, if we spend a larger portion of the money that came in, that's going to increase that spending multiplier, because that spending multiplier is simply 1 over 1 minus the MPC. So the bigger this number gets, the smaller this denominator gets, and the larger this whole thing gets. So marginal propensity to save, of course, is shrinking if you're going to be consuming more. Savings rate is shrinking. Exports aren't going to be increasing. Imports might be increasing, and it really has no effect on aggregate supply. Alright, if Mexicans increase their investment in the United States, the supply of Mexican pesos to the foreign exchange market and the dollar price of the peso will most likely change in which of the following ways? Well, this is, oops, let me pause and let you answer for a second. This is a classic case of we're looking at the market for pesos, right? Quantity of pesos. We'll have a demand for pesos. We have a supply of pesos. If Mexicans want to invest in the United States, they need dollars. Oh, and by the way, this is the how many dollars per peso. How much does it cost in dollar price per peso? All right. So anyway, if Mexicans want to invest in the U.S. They need U.S. dollars, so they need to get rid of their pesos. So the supply is going to increase. So not any of those. And the price, the dollar price, is actually going to decrease. It's going to go down. I'm going to go with B, not A. Alright, number 23. If a commercial bank with no excess reserves has no excess reserves and the reserve requirement is 10%, what is the value of new loans this single bank can issue if a new customer deposits $10,000? If I were answering this one, you got to be careful reading it, because the question says, what's the value of new loans this single bank can issue? It's not asking how much will the total money supply increase potentially. That might be tempting to think that, and you'd go, oh, well, the money multiplier equals 1 over the reserve requirement, so it equals 1 over 0.1 equals 10, so you'd be like, oh, 10 times 10,000 means it's going to grow by 100,000. That is a colorful distractor. No, that is not correct, because it's saying what can this single bank lend? Well, if they get $10,000, they must keep 1,000 of it, 10% of it, and they can lend out the other 9,000. Number 24. I feel like we're... Nope, I lied. I thought we were moving all along well. I'm going too slow. An increase in government spending with no change in taxes leads to... Well, let's think about what would happen if we had an increase in government spending. As soon as I see that, I think aggregate demand, aggregate supply. And if we increase government, oh, this is price level, of course, and real GDP. If we have an increase in government spending, that should increase aggregate demand, which means what are we going to have? Price level going up, and price level is going up, and the total amount of stuff being produced is going to go up. If we're producing more stuff, that means there are more people employed. That's not a lower income level. That's going to be a higher income level. It's not a lower price level. We just saw it. It actually had an increase in our price level. It's not going to really affect the money supply. Government spending doesn't affect the money supply. So I guess the question is, are we going to have a higher interest rate, or are we going to have higher bond prices? And this one's maybe at least we've narrowed it down to a 50-50 here, but that's kind of a tricky one. If we have higher demand and higher income, I guess the way I would think about it is, that's a tough one. Told you this was a stream of thought. What is going to happen there? We have higher. I guess what we got to look at is what graph maybe can I model this with? If we have higher bond prices, that effectively means a lower rate on your investments, because those things move inverse of each other. So I know it can't be both of these. Obviously, it can't be both of these. So I guess what I would be thinking about is we've got interest rates for our loanable funds market, right? And we've got a demand and a supply for loanable funds. Now, if you have that increasing economy, the economy is doing well, you have higher incomes, higher overall wealth, that means you're more likely to want to consume some stuff. And if you're going to consume stuff, well, you might need to borrow some money to do so, but you might be willing to because you've got that higher income and the economy is looking well. And so you'd actually have an increase in the demand for loanable funds. And if you have an increase in the demand for loanable funds, well, that is going to actually drive up interest rates. So I'm going to go with D. That was not my most confident answer there. So I'll check the answer key, and yeah, D is the correct answer there. So that was a tough one. It was pretty easy to narrow it down to a 50-50, but that one was actually kind of tough from that point on. If aggregate demand and aggregate supply, if these AD and AS represent aggregate demand and aggregate supply curves respectively, and the arrows indicate the movement of the curves, which of the following best illustrates long-run economic growth? I will pause here for a second to show you the rest of the graphs. Alright, what this is really getting at is the short run versus long run aggregate supply, and really it is going to be a movement not in aggregate demand. Increasing demand doesn't increase our overall ability to produce, and of course a shift back in aggregate supply is not going to be good for it. And this is another shift back in aggregate supply. This looks more like the long run aggregate supply, but that's actually decreasing, so I don't like that. I do like this increasing aggregate supply, and again that perfectly vertical one generally would be the long run aggregate supply, and if in the long run aggregate supply is moving over, that means our potential GDP is increasing. Again, a shift in aggregate demand, though, that looks to me just like the potential for inflation there, perhaps demand pull inflation, or maybe just a return back to equilibrium, depending on where we started. Hey, speaking of which, here's a beautiful graph. You should know how to draw this graph. But let's assume the economy is at full employment equilibrium in the diagram shown above. Which of the following would lead to stagflation? Well, stagflation comes from really a supply shock, so a big increase in prices in supply. So our aggregate supply shifts back, that drives up prices, and if the government tries to increase demand, well, we're probably going to see then those higher wages result in even more shift back in the aggregate supply. So what is it? Well, it's a what causes that is what we just said there, just that shift in the aggregate supply curve, and so it's that leftward shift on the short run aggregate supply curve only. It's not a rightward shift on aggregate supply, it's not a change in aggregate demand, and it's not a shift in both of those things. So yes, I'll go with A. Ooh, 27. If the real interest rates in country X increase relative to the real interest rates in country Y, and there are no trade barriers between the two countries, then for country X, which of the following will be true of its capital flow, the value of its currency, and its exports? Alright, well, let's think about this for a second. I'm just going to then for country X, which is going to be which of the following is true? I guess I want to start with I'll start with I guess I'll start with the currency one, because that's the one I want to start with. So here's the quantity of we'll call it X dollars, and we have a demand and a supply for them, and then we have its exchange rate initial. Alright, so if, let's see, the real interest rate in country X increases relative to the real interest rate in country Y, well then I want to invest my money in country X. In order to invest in country X, I'm going to need more country X dollars, so I think that's going to lead to an increase in the demand for those. And we're going to have that exchange rate actually increase, so the currency is going to be appreciating. Then, of course, they're appreciating because that money is coming into the country, so the capital is an inflow there. So the last thing that I have to figure out is, are exports going to increase or decrease? Well, if the value of my currency is higher, it's going to be harder for people in other countries to buy my goods because they're becoming more expensive. So I think my exports are actually going to decrease a little bit. And that is indeed the correct answer. So, let's see. A couple more to go and then I'll move on to the next video. So 28. When a central bank sells securities in the open market, which of the following set of events is most likely to occur? Alright, so if they are selling securities, that means, I drew this earlier, the other one, so there's my Fed. There's my Fed building. If they're selling securities, then the money is going to have, people are, in order to buy them from the Fed, the money is going to go in there and it's going to disappear. So money supply is decreasing. So it's not going to be an increase in the money supply. It's not going to be an increase in the money supply. Alright, so is it going to be an increase in interest rates? Well, let's think about that. Here's my money supply market and interest rates, and let's see, we're decreasing the money supply. So yeah, we might have an increase in interest rates. An increase in the government budget deficit. I don't think that the central bank working in open market transactions has any effect on the government budget deficit, so no, I don't actually like that answer. Let's see, we are going to see a decrease in the money supply, an increase in interest rates, yep, I saw that over there, and a decrease in aggregate demand, yeah, because people with the higher interest rates, investment will go down. I kind of like D. And let's see, 20E. A decrease in the money supply, yep. No, we're going to see an increase in interest rates. So no, I do not like E. 29. The federal funds rate is the interest rate that... Oh, this is just a definition. The federal funds rate, the discount rate is what the Fed charges to other banks. No, the federal, not the rate that the Reserve charges to the government. Yes, the Fed funds rate is that target rate that the Fed sets for banks to charge each other if they borrow from each other. I'm going to go with B on that one. And then last one for this video, according to the long run Phillips curve, which of the following is true? Sorry, I'll let you pause the video and try and answer that. Well, if you remember the long-run Phillips curve, of course the short run shows the trade-off between inflation and unemployment, but the long run shows that in the long run the inflation rate doesn't really matter. So unemployment increases with an increase in inflation? No. Unemployment decreases? No. Increased automation will lead to lower levels of structural... No, doesn't show that. Changes in the composition of the overall demand of labor tend to be deflationary in the long run? No. The natural rate of unemployment is independent of monetary and fiscal policy changes that affect aggregate demand. Yes, the natural rate of unemployment, remember this long-run Phillips curve is at that natural rate of unemployment, and regardless of what aggregate demand does, right? So if aggregate demand goes up or if it goes back down and price levels change, it doesn't change the natural rate of unemployment. I like that answer. I'll go with 30E. So I hope this has helped so far. If you enjoy it, come back for more in parts 3 and 4 as we do the rest of this test.